Good morning, everybody. The title apparently caused great confusion of this presentation. And actually, I didn't choose it myself. It was kind of chosen for us. But it tries to indicate that I want to at least talk about something which was fairly unimaginable just maybe a year ago. Something I at least wouldn't have expected to be talking about in this way today. And what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about this slide, which Heather showed in her opening keynote, and it shows the distribution of royalties around the world. And Heather used it in principle to indicate that it's a very unequal distribution of royalties. And what I'm going to talk about at the moment is how these royalties get distributed around the world. How does this work? How does this actually come to creators? And which mechanisms are in there? And you might wonder, why is this necessarily related to Creative Commons? I've borrowed this slide from Larry, who used it last year at the iSummit as his opening slide for his presentation. And it is the logo of the International Confederation of Collecting Societies in the world, CSAC. And Larry used it to describe something where he was put in a discussion where the discussion was framed in a way that he perceived it as him, me, versus the collecting societies. And what that was a conversation which took place in Brussels, where basically Larry was set up on stage with the head of the Australian Collecting Society, ACRA, in order to discuss the merits of these two systems. And basically they tried to accuse Larry of undermining the value of music with what we do. We're basically blaming us, the collecting societies are blaming Creative Commons for a long while of undermining the value of music because they think music should be paid for under all circumstances, and we offer artists licenses which allow them to give away music for free. To understand this position, why they are insisting so much on that music needs to have a value and that artists should get paid, it might make sense to go back a little bit in history. And this is my radio, which kind of like shows why collective rights management actually developed. It illustrates like the necessity for collective rights management. So if you look at the history of copyright, basically for the first 50 years or so, it covered one form of works, which was basically texts, like copy. Then, around the turn of the century, it started to cover a whole range of different forms of works, and it got much more complicated over the last century to actually control this and make sure that the creators got rewarded for the production of these works. And maybe one of the key developments was the invention of the radio, basically because it's a very decentralized medium, it very much reaches out to everybody, and it's very hard to control who listens and to somehow make people who listen to the radio pay for the works they consume or for the consumption of that work. And that is basically still what the majority of the music collecting societies still do today. Basically, they have figured out a way via blanket licenses to charge individual radio users or the radio stations for their users in order to get the artists compensated for the use of their works. A while ago, I was at a presentation where there was one of the people for the BBC who buys music, and he says he spends like 2.5 billion pounds per year on music, and he would rather pay 10% more than even think about having to individually negotiate with musicians for the use of their rights. And he illustrated this by a figure. The BBC, which runs, at that point at least, it did run something like 27 different outfits, uses more than 200,000 individual different works per week on those radio stations. So there's simply, like, even for an organization like the BBC, absolutely no possibility to negotiate individual deals with these people in order to use their works. Now, you might wonder why this is important for Creative Commons, or why should we bother with that? We're not in the business of collecting royalties for artists. We're in the business of offering them licenses. And one of the problems we've run into fairly quickly when we expanded Creative Commons outside of the United States is the fact that the collecting societies tell their members and other people who are not their members to not use our licenses. They can tell that to people outside of the collecting societies. They just say, like, we don't like that stuff. We don't think you should like these licenses. You should become a member. That's not that bad. But which is fairly bad for us is that they tell their own members simply, you can't use this. This is a perfectly fine trash can there. And somebody else comes along and spray paints on it, don't use it. That's what the collecting society does to our licenses. And this creates irritation because lots of young artists don't know that they, when they sign up with the collecting society, sign away all their rights to the collecting society, or most of their rights, relevant rights to these collecting societies. Which, after we ported the Creative Commons licenses to the Netherlands and we had the launch event, one of the first questions after the presentations at that thing was, so I'm a member of Buma Stemra, which is the local collecting society for authors and composers. I'm a member of Buma Stemra, and I can't use the licenses, something which hadn't occurred to us at that moment, that this would be a problem. And we were basically like, what? How can this be? How can other people tell other people that they can't use our licenses? So we dug into that issue for a while, and we figured out it's because of the exclusivity of the assignment of rights to the collecting societies in Europe, pretty much everywhere outside of the US, that basically the Creative Commons licenses don't work as well for musicians outside of the US as they work in the US. We had seen the wired CD and things like that, and we thought, like, perfect, that's a good instrument for music, except if you happen to be a member of a non-US collecting society, it's extremely difficult. And this has been a situation where we've been like for a very long time. I have maybe spent 2.5 years of talking to the collecting societies about these issues, talking to them on the international level and in the Netherlands, with the idea to get them to change. And sometimes change happens. Actually, last year, lots of change happened. I think it's good that change happens once in a while. And so, where this story changed in the last year is that we in the Netherlands last August announced a pilot project where our collecting society would let their members use Creative Commons licenses under certain conditions. The main condition being, and I don't want to go into the details because I've spoken about that here in more detail at 2 other panels or events here at this summit, but the main thing is they said, like, okay, for us it makes no sense to allow our members to give away their music to commercial users, but it might actually make sense to allow people to give the music away to non-commercial users. Which means they have, somewhat reluctantly, but they have in the end accepted to allow their members to use the non-commercial Creative Commons licenses, the 3 of them which we have. And how this thing works is basically like this. You have a work. This is the album, the first album of a young Danish artist, Tone, which was released on the day the Danish Collecting Society Coda, together with Creative Commons Denmark, announced something very similar in structure to our pilot project in January of this year. And this album was released on that day. And what's happening is, if there's commercial use made of that work, then this green guy, which for some reason represents the collecting society, collects royalties. And after a while, after processing the whole stuff, sends it back to the artist, most of it at least. But as soon as there's non-commercial use made, other musicians or other music lovers can basically download this, can, if the license allows this, remix this, upload it again for non-commercial purposes. They can share it. So basically they can use this work under the terms of the Creative Commons license, which was attached to it. Which, especially for young musicians, or newcomers to the field, sometimes is a very, very interesting way to get promotion, to get their work out in as many hands as possible, but also to see others from the creative community engaging with that work. And just to give you, if you've been following this discussion a little bit, you will notice that this fact here, that you now can have a Creative Commons license on the website, which in the text, or actually not in the text next to it, links to the Creative Commons deed, which then links via the CC+ protocol to the website of a collecting society, what tells you what you can or cannot do under that license with works licensed by their members, is pretty much a breakthrough. It was us CC versus the collecting societies for a long time, and now we suddenly link to each other. Even they link to our website and basically point their members to the place in the Netherlands where they can obtain these Creative Commons licenses from our website. Sorry that you can't read that, that's in Dutch. I have a very short public service announcement from John Phillips. CC Plus is not a license for those people who've been here for a while. And so we've created basically an infrastructure here. An infrastructure which allows these artists to profit from the both of best worlds, probably, to make an informed decision if they want to license their, or how they want to license their works, and if for them it makes sense to use Creative Commons license to get the work spread out or to get other creatives to engage with it, then they can just do that. We very much hope that this will spread to other countries, to other jurisdictions where this will be possible for more and more artists. This is probably a model which makes a lot of sense. And this is something we've discussed in a session here yesterday, which was more informal with lots of people involved with that, lots of people engaging with collecting societies in other countries on behalf of Creative Commons or the Creative Commons jurisdiction projects. And so, for example, one of the countries where there's also talks going on is Australia at the moment. But in the end, that discussion centered around something which I guess we summarized as Music 2.0. How do you deal with Music 2.0? That's a term used by Sylvain from Jamendo in his presentation. And the question was a little bit, does it make sense? Like, is there a need for collecting societies? Is there a need for Creative Commons? Isn't Creative Commons just a better model for people to get their music out, and don't they need to be reimbursed directly for the copying or for the consumption of the music? And artists rather go out and create income from live gigs, from whatever, from sales of merchandise, that whole discussion, or insist on voluntary payments, which we talked a lot about yesterday as well. It's maybe interesting, that's something advocated by this gentleman here, Jameson Young, Australian musician who travels around the world, uses Creative Commons licensing all the time. This is a picture of him in Paris somewhere. And it's a bit interesting because he's been probably from our side, from our community, one of the fiercest critics of collecting societies, and he simply doesn't like them. But sometimes change does happen, because in the end, something very good happened to him last year. One of his songs, which is freely available on his website under a CC BY license, so it can even be used commercially without even asking him, got selected by the director of the new X-Files movie and got included. Like 1 minute of that song is foreground music in a major Hollywood production that will, under normal circumstances, generate quite a nice bit of income, especially if you're otherwise used to playing in very, very small but like intimate, nice venues with your own music. So he has this 1 minute of his music in this film, which gets currently shown around, probably right now, in a couple of theaters at parallel, thousands of people watching that, and that's what collecting societies are very good, extracting little tiny payments for that and reimbursing that to him. So he joined the American society ASCAP somewhere earlier this year to make that possible. The whole deal was also done via a website called BeatPick, which kind of creates these synchronization licenses for the movie makers. The strange thing even is it shows, we discussed yesterday in another panel about basically people being, if there's really people who are good in the sense that they pay for something which they don't have to pay for. Strange thing is this song was Creative Commons BY license. They could have chosen just to put his name in the credit roll and not pay him a cent, and they still do. So this is pretty much where that discussion ended, and where's this story which I wanted to tell. Just yesterday on the way home, I learned that there is, and we're always talking about the collection societies. And I mean, there's multiple ones. There's 17 for different types of rights in the Netherlands alone. There's a lot of one, and since we're in Japan here, yesterday someone told me, someone told me that there is there's Jazz Rock, the big dominant player on the market, and there's this fairly new organization, JRC, and I think Arakawa-san, who's here in the room somewhere, or I think he's in the room somewhere, so. And they have some very interesting models. Basically, it looks for things like uploading content to user-generated content sites, to things like YouTube, they allow the content of members to be used in the way, if you, like we did yesterday night in the karaoke bar, like if you sing your own bad version of that song, then it can be uploaded to YouTube and can be shared with people. And there's a deal in the background which probably covers some royalties for that as well. But so they say, like, as long as you sing it badly, you can upload it to YouTube, but you can't upload the original, which I think is very interesting and very solid approach to like actually enabling the production of user-generated content and making it circulate freely, taking the friction out of the system. Pretty much the same what Creative Commons wants to aspire. And yesterday's discussion at the end centered a little bit around the issue of is there really a need for collecting societies? And when I came home from the karaoke bar yesterday, was pointed to something which on Boing Boing, which Cory Doctorow wrote in The Observer yesterday. And he says, like, he was talking about the situation in the United Kingdom where there's this idea of disconnecting people who file share from the internet because, like, it's considered to be illegal downloading that, which probably is a pretty stupid idea, disconnecting people from the internet. And he says, like, there's one thing which is probably historically inevitable, and that is whenever technology makes it impossible to police a class of copyright use, we solve the problem by creating blanket licenses. That is what the problem with My Radio, which was created for artists from the perspective, how do they track the use of music on the radio? We just created a blanket license. We tasked an organization, in this case the Collecting Society, with distributing that money which gets generated via these royalty payments, distributed back to the creators. And there's a lot of people saying that this is one of the situations which probably will happen to the internet as well. The internet enables the distribution of music almost perfectly. Right now, nobody has really figured out how to couple that to reimbursement mechanisms which work for each and everyone. And one of the things we might see happening sooner than later is the introduction of blanket licenses, and my bet would be in that case we have blanket licenses. It will be administrated in some form or another by the existing collecting societies, which for us means we better have arrangements in place that we can work with them and we don't have that relationship of us versus the collecting societies in that point in future anymore. Well, thank you.